That afternoon began in the most forgettable way possible, with me pulling my car into the familiar cracked parking lot of my apartment complex. After a long work day, mentally exhausted, physically drained, and focused only on the small comfort of knowing that once my groceries were inside, I could finally shut the door on the outside world and enjoy a quiet evening alone. The sun was still hanging low enough to cast long shadows across the pavement as I opened my trunk and stared at the chaotic collection of grocery bags packed so tightly together that it was immediately obvious I had wildly overestimated my ability to carry everything upstairs. In one trip, my apartment sat on the second floor of an aging 3-story building with no elevator, a narrow stairwell, and chipped railings that had seen decades of tenants come and go. So after a moment of internal debate, I resigned myself to the reality of making multiple trips, choosing practicality over pride. I gathered the heaviest bags first, lifting cases of bottled water, canned food, rice, oil, and cleaning supplies until the plastic handle stretched uncomfortably against my fingers, already biting into my skin before I had even taken a single step toward the stairs. As I climbed upward, each step echoed slightly in the enclosed stairwell, the smell of old paint and disinfectant filling the air while my breathing grew heavier, and my focus narrowed to nothing but reaching my door without dropping anything. By the time I reached my apartment, my arms were trembling from the strain, and I quickly unlocked the door, set the bags down inside, and stepped back out again, not pausing long enough to notice anything unusual beyond the mild relief of having completed the hardest part first. It was only when I descended back toward the parking lot that I noticed a woman standing near her car, completely still, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, her posture rigid, and her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that immediately made me uncomfortable. She looked well put together in a way that felt deliberate rather than casual, with perfectly styled hair, large sunglasses despite the fading sunlight, and an expression that suggested she had already decided something about me without ever speaking a word. Assuming nothing more than a curious neighbor momentarily distracted, I offered a brief polite nod as I passed, the kind exchanged daily between strangers who share a building, but not their lives. Yet she didn't respond or soften her stare, choosing instead to watch me as if she were memorizing my movements. On my second trip, I lifted the medium-weight bags filled with groceries that rattled softly as I walked, milk sloshing gently inside its container while produce shifted and bread crinkled, creating a soundtrack that felt almost absurdly domestic given what was about to unfold. As I reached the first few steps of the stairwell, a sharp voice cut through the quiet of the parking lot, loud enough to stop me mid-step and force my attention backward. "Excuse me," the woman called out, her tone firm and impatient, as though I had violated an unspoken rule she believed everyone else should already know. Balancing the bags carefully, I turned to face her, surprised but still calm, and answered with a simple acknowledgement, expecting perhaps a question about parking or directions rather than what followed. She narrowed her eyes slightly and asked why I kept going in and out of the building, emphasizing the repetition of my movement as if it were evidence of something suspicious, rather than the natural result of carrying too many groceries. For a moment, I genuinely thought she might be joking, because the explanation felt so obvious that it hardly seemed worth stating. So I gestured toward the bags in my arms and explained that I was bringing my groceries upstairs in multiple trips. Her expression didn't change, and instead of accepting the explanation, she leaned forward slightly and told me that behavior like that looked suspicious, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that suggested she believed her opinion carried authority. I laughed lightly out of disbelief, asking what could possibly be suspicious about groceries. Yet the absence of humor in her face made it clear that she was not exaggerating or misinterpreting the situation for effect. She explained that people didn't usually move back and forth like that unless they were hiding something, delivering something illegal, or casing the building, casually listing these ideas as if they were reasonable assumptions rather than wild accusations. Keeping my tone measured despite the growing irritation in my chest, I told her I lived there, specified my apartment number, and explained again that the amount of groceries simply required more than one trip up the stairs. Instead of responding verbally, she pulled out her phone and began tapping on the screen with sharp, deliberate movements, all while telling me she had lived in the building for years and had never seen me before, implying that my presence itself was suspicious. I reminded her that people move in and out all the time and that I had lived there for months, but she had already turned slightly away from me, her attention now split between her phone and her own assumptions. Choosing not to escalate the interaction further, I continued upstairs, dismissing the exchange as an unpleasant but ultimately meaningless encounter with a stranger who enjoyed inserting herself into other people's business. By the time I returned for the third and final trip, my patience had worn thin, my arms were sore, and all I wanted was to finish carrying the last bags and forget the strange interaction entirely. As I locked my car and lifted the final set of groceries, I noticed the woman had repositioned herself closer to the stairwell, standing squarely in my path with an expression that suggested she had been waiting for me. Without hesitation or preamble, she announced that she had called the police, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that sent an immediate wave of disbelief through me. I stopped completely, staring at her in stunned silence before asking her to repeat what she had just said. Hoping I had misunderstood or misheard something so irrational, she calmly confirmed that she had reported suspicious activity, explaining that someone repeatedly entering and exiting the building with bags made her feel unsafe and that she believed the police needed to investigate. Trying to remain composed, I asked her how carrying groceries could possibly warrant a police response. Yet she dismissed my concern by stating that if I had nothing to hide, then the officers would simply confirm it. At that moment, the tension in the parking lot became visible. As a neighbor taking out trash slowed to watch, another peeked from a balcony above, and the everyday quiet of the complex was replaced by an uncomfortable sense of public scrutiny. Minutes later, a police cruiser pulled into the lot, its presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from awkward confrontation to official seriousness. Even though the situation itself remained painfully absurd, two officers stepped out and approached, calmly asking who had made the call and what the nature of the suspicious activity was, their professionalism contrasting sharply with the exaggerated concern that had summoned them. The woman eagerly identified herself as the caller and pointed directly at me, explaining that she didn't recognize me, didn't know why I kept entering the building, and believed something wasn't right. When the officers turned to me, I explained that I lived there and was simply carrying groceries upstairs in multiple trips, gesturing toward the bags still in my hands as visual confirmation of my story. They asked for identification, which I provided without hesitation, along with my apartment key clearly labeled with the unique number, allowing them to quickly verify my residency. After confirming everything, one officer stated plainly that carrying groceries was not suspicious behavior, and that I was well within my rights to come and go from my own apartment as needed. The woman protested, suggesting that keys could be copied and that she was only trying to keep the building safe. But her argument lacked substance and grew weaker with each sentence. The second officer informed her that repeatedly calling emergency services without legitimate cause could itself become a problem, emphasizing that fear alone did not justify wasting police resources. Visibly frustrated and embarrassed, she crossed her arms again and turned away, muttering under her breath while the officers apologized to me for the inconvenience and returned to their vehicle. As I finally climbed the stairs for the last time, carrying the remaining bags past the familiar chipped walls, I noticed subtle nods of understanding from neighbors who had witnessed the encounter and clearly recognized the imbalance of the situation. Inside my apartment, I set the groceries down and leaned against the counter, the quiet suddenly overwhelming as the adrenaline faded and left behind a mix of exhaustion, disbelief, and lingering frustration. Later that evening, a neighbor knocked on my door to apologize on behalf of the building, explaining that the same woman had a history of calling the police on delivery drivers, maintenance workers, and anyone she personally deemed out of place. As I put my groceries away one by one, the reality settled in that something as ordinary as carrying food home had been turned into a confrontation simply because someone had decided I did not belong. That night, I realized how easily everyday actions could be misinterpreted when paranoia replaced empathy, and how quickly normal life could become uncomfortable when someone chose to weaponize authority against harmless behavior.